What if burnout wasn't a problem to fix, but a signal guiding you toward deeper alignment with life? The Practice Podcast invites you to explore how aligning with your energy can transform your connection to yourself, your relationships, and your work. Through real stories, data-driven insights, and life-centered tools, each episode helps you tune into your body's signals and create life-affirming change from the inside out. Welcome to the Practice Podcast. Some of the best conversations have been when two different bodies of work find each other and realize they are circling the same thing. That's what happened when Dr. Brennan Jacoby came into the practice this spring. Brennan is a philosopher and the founder of Philosophy at Work. He helps leaders and organizations develop the kind of trust, curiosity, and cognitive confidence they need to actually think well under pressure. And when he met energetic literacy, something just clicked. This summer, Brennan is our featured voice inside the cohort, and this conversation is a preview of what's possible when philosophy and energetic literacy are in the same room. I'm so glad Brennan is here. Let's get into it. All right, so I have Dr. Brennan Jacoby. It's so wonderful to have you. I am so excited for this conversation because we get to explore the nooks and crannies philosophically, which is something that I naturally gravitate to. I am a seeker, if you haven't been able to tell. So when I get a mind and a heart like yours in the room, I feel so free to get so curious and to just explore. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It is an absolute pleasure. I have just so enjoyed getting to know your work and SORCE, learning about the practice, and looking forward to having our sort of curiosities meet and thinking with you today.
Co-mingle. Curiosities are going to co-mingle.
Yes.
We get to Dr. Brennan Jacoby through another featured voice, which is Dr. Dale Wellehen, who has blown our minds in all things behavioral psychology and burnout and temporal thinking. So yes, just a big shout out to Dr. Dale for bringing another beautiful soul to us. Let's go ahead and start with your origin story so people can get a little bit of a sense of what has attracted you to this work, this practical idea, that philosophy belongs at work, not just in, academic settings.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to before I studied philosophy, I was studying radio broadcasting. And I was working in a radio station and I loved it, but I loved the sort of connection with people rather than the technical behind the scenes kind of bits, right? And I was at a liberal arts university. And so part of the degree, despite doing communications, was you had to do a bit of philosophy. Set in on Intro to Philosophy and just fell in love with it. And I thought maybe if I learn how to think, then I could go back to radio and have more to say. And so I switched my major to philosophy. And I haven't really made the move back to communications and radio. But I think that idea at the heart of whatever it is that we're doing, yes, for work, but also for life more broadly, the way that we think matters. So at Philosophy Work, we talk a lot about thinking better so that we do better. So, and also I think that goes back to when I was working as an academic and as I went through and did my degrees, I got a little bit annoyed sometimes when there was this presumed wedge being driven between thinking and doing that, well, we've got things to do around this business, so we don't have time to think. And philosophy is just abstract, and what we're doing is concrete, and we are operational. We're not, philosophy is something that's sort of abstract. And so I was trying to make that link that actually how we think, thinking is practical. How we think informs what we do. And it started with that experience of going, ooh, I don't know what I'm going to do with philosophy, but it feels important for what I have to say on the radio. And then just very organically, things happened. People were very generous to sort of connect me with other people, and until I was starting to have conversations with businesses about how they can think their best. And then fast forward to now, where Philosophy at Work is a collective of people like myself that have backgrounds in philosophy, and we work with businesses on things like, how do we ask great questions? Because we know that the questions help shape the answers. And how do we think critically without being critical as individuals, if that makes sense? How do we think strategically, and decision making and thinking through change and all that stuff? But it goes right back to that big idea of how we think, and the quality of our thinking is really meaningful. And so that's what I think is worth bringing into work and bringing into the things that we're trying to get done.
Is, in your definition, feeling included in thinking?
Great question. Yes. And I think, again, it's that I would have maybe at one point said no, because historically, in the history of Western thought, certainly, at least, Western, I'll be more specific, Western analytical philosophy, which is the kind of philosophy that grew up in, the UK, where I live now, and North America, where I was born and grew up. In that tradition, there is a wedge is driven between reason and emotion, and all the feeling stuff gets put in the emotion bucket. Right. So you have philosophers saying things like, it's reason's job to control the emotion that are like wild horses, and all this sort of stuff. And I think there's those kinds of ways of thinking are not necessarily true, but or helpful. and I don't think that's the case. So much more now how I approach it is that when we're thinking is just doing stuff with information. And we can do stuff with information in ways that traditionally we would say went on in our skulls, in our brains of some sort. But actually our mind is a lot more than our brain. And when I'm thinking through something, the phenomena of that, I don't think it's all just happening in my head. And I don't think it's all just using reason. I think I feel my way to a conclusion as well. Sometimes that's an affective kind of feeling, which is feeling, but not as tangible as much as other times when it is very much a material kind of feeling. I can sort of feel a sensation in, my gut or in another part of my body that is somehow important in thinking through the decision I'm making or something like that, right? So I think if we're saying, yes, how we think our best definitely involves we are embodied thinkers, and is an embodied experience. It's the whole works, reason, emotion, and felt sort of body experience.
And for everybody listening, Dr. Brennan just completed a 30-day experience with SORCE. So he had been steeped in this experience of navigating your energetic information. And I love the way that you included feeling into your thinking and differentiated reason from feeling, but the reason and the feeling combine into the kind of the pot that you can think from, if you will. So how was your experience in the 30-day? What did you uncover through the process of growing what we call your energetic literacy?
Yeah. And just to go back to that point, I think definitely they're interwoven. The reason and emotion and we could say left brain, right brain, how they talk to each other, I think is the really exciting bit. Not just because of insights that come out of that, but because when we notice, so something that I noticed in the 30-day sort of experience was times when I felt pulled to go more left brain that is more, I want some certainty now. And I want some certainty that is objectively verifiable. And hey, that's good. I mean, I have a difficult relationship with certainty personally. So I think that I'm all for objective, scientific knowledge, things that we can point to and know. And seeing that as equally valuable as the sort of right brain, the subjective, felt experience of things like quality. I think that's really interesting. You can't put quality in a test tube, but it's super meaningful. And so, but across all those things, across left brain, right brain, there's certainty, which is, I think, a desire for control. I want to know exactly what's certain, what is definitely going to be the case. And there were times in the 30-day experience where I felt myself wanting the safety, I suppose, of certainty. And sometimes that pulled me towards the left brain for some sort of like quantifiable certainty. Sometimes that pulled me towards the right brain of some sort of, I want to know what I really think about this, what I really feel about this. Or sometimes there were other members of the practice that were sharing experiences like, gosh, that sounds cool. I'd love to have that experience. And it was a kind of more subjective perspective that I wanted to be pulled into. But what I learned, and I think was being cultivated throughout the 30 days that was so valuable, was the ability to observe where I was, observe that pull, and sit with it, I suppose, be okay with it. So I think the practice and what SORCE is doing, going right over to the objective sort of measuring of HRV, over to how we interpret that and use that as a launch pad really for this learning and this growth and flourishing, is that it helps us notice and then work with the data that we have. Data is a very sort of left brain sounding kind of thing, but I don't think it has to be. It's sort of working with the input that we have, whether that's objective right brain stuff, objective left brain, subjective right brain, and just noticing and being okay with where I'm at. So I think I'm someone that likes to know how I'm doing and that I'm achieving, that I'm sort of smashing my goals. And something throughout the 30 days was just turning up the volume a little bit on noticing those pulls towards certainty, and then accepting that I was on a journey, I'll say, and moving in the right direction, even if I didn't have a sense of control in that.
I mean, I think you've just articulated the tension of the human experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's that there are these knowns and there are these unknowns. And what we're trying to in the 30-day is get people, again, oriented to what it really means to be in a body and to be friendly with your system, because it is not energetically advantageous to, in my opinion, make people think that everything can be controlled, or that give people a false sense of certainty, that actually what is really needed to be in a body and to be healthy and well is to have a healthy tolerance for the mystery and to be able to relax into that while also being honest. I love this practice because it is ultimately about being honest with your personal experience, which there aren't a lot of settings where people have been so free to even practice what honesty really looks like and sounds like. And that's what we want to hold a container for, is that process of sensing in and just telling, like truth telling, and to understand that as I tell the truth, my reality changes and it's never static. So you know, you're always in this experience of, in my opinion, being born.
Yes. And something though that really struck me in the 30 days was a version of that honesty that is so much richer that than I think what is sometimes assumed. If we say this is the practice is a vessel for honesty, I think sometimes the assumption might be that, okay, it's going to be a cohort where, you're encouraged and it's okay just to be really transparent and just call it like you see it, and I think there is that, but actually it's so much richer than that, because what I experienced was the honesty isn't just, well, hey, I'm going to say what I think. It's more, actually, I'm going to go right back down to starting with, where is my energy today? Let me be honest with myself. Let me be honest with what I have capacity for today. Let me be honest with what I should be aiming for today, given the capacity of my team. And so it almost feels like, yes, it is definitely honesty, but it feels like, I would say, sustainability that is grounded in something which is true, if I can use that word.
So I really like what you just brought up, because what you're pointing at is that we aren't a place where we're like, we want you to be, I don't know, like verbal vomiting an unempowered story into the group. That isn't what we are going for. When we say we want you to be energetically honest, it's almost like you are looking at, it's like you're resting a little bit more, I don't know how else to say it, maybe you have a better word, but higher. It's at like a higher level of consciousness that's looking at the full spectrum of both the objective reality of how recovered you are from the prior day's stress, therefore objectively how much effort would be best for the day ahead, but you're also needing to take in the right brain subjective information as to also maybe why that's the case. What did I do? There's a little bit of a reflection. What happened yesterday that imprinted on my system? I've been carrying this load in my chest. What is this about? And you're looking at it from, I would say, a higher vantage point. I don't want to say omnipotent. That sounds a little too odd, but it's like it's higher level that you're looking at all of it, and then you're getting honest about what you see from that vantage point, rather than just verbal vomiting a trauma story over and over. We don't find that to be energetically helpful. To name what is real and to be able to say it in a group setting, I think is important. That is important to healing, but it isn't about identifying that is you. What you're saying is that is here. And that's a big differentiator. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. Maybe it's just strikes me a reduction of the concept of honesty, So these days we tend, if you say honesty is important, I imagine that you're talking about honesty which takes place when you verbally articulate something to someone else, right? So, but that's just one form of honesty. There's also honesty with yourself, right? And honesty with what I'm really feeling, or honesty with what I can give or can't give right now, or whatever, right? So there's honesty means, I suppose, this is my own definition, but not having an opaque sort of barrier between what's really going on and with what I'm accepting, with what I'm acknowledging is going on. If I'm crying, and I'm crying because I'm not feeling okay. There's lots of reasons to cry, but I'm crying because I'm not feeling okay. You say to me, "Are you okay?" And I say, "Oh yeah, no, I'm fine." That's being dishonest, but that's only the form of honesty between people. And I think something that goes on in the 30-day experience is honesty that is very important and rich, but that starts not at just honesty between people, but honesty with yourself, honesty with that is prompted by that sort of energetic literacy piece. right? Prompted by the HRV reading and then taken from there.
What is the, how do you relate honesty to the workplace?
That's a good question.
In my opinion, people are just choking on their truth. They have all these truth aches that they can't, because they're interfacing sometimes with an entity that doesn't have tolerance for honesty. And I feel like it cripples the overall organism that is the organization. So philosophically, how do you unpack this for organizations?
Yeah. So I suppose one of the places where it comes in the way that I work with businesses is on the topic of trust. So I did my PhD on the philosophy of trust, and the way that a lot of the work came about was working with brands that had lost the public's trust, or working in businesses where maybe collaboration needed to be better, or there wasn't enough psychological safety. Now, when I work on trust, it's usually in the service of sort of great thinking. So we know that we don't think our best if we don't feel safe, right? So we'll work on things like psychological safety to try to create some of that sense of safety and groundedness, so that we can then get our prefrontal cortex firing well, and we can think well together. And I think honesty comes in there. So a lot of times for trust to be built, and built at a healthy amount, or to a healthy degree, because there's such a thing as too much trust. We don't want sort of blind faith. We want well-formed trust, right? For it to be at a healthy amount requires honesty, and that's reciprocal. So honesty that goes both ways. So I think where honesty comes into work is oftentimes at the point of trust, at the point of relationships. But some things that come to mind hearing the question and how you framed it was, I think a lot of times we have, as you put it, these sort of truth aches, because for a couple of different reasons, at least. It might be interpersonal. It might be that, I'm working with someone or for someone or alongside someone, or someone's working for me that I don't feel like I can be honest with. And the withholding of that information, where I'm understanding that honesty, going back to what we were saying before, as necessarily the sharing between people, not just a sort of being honest with myself. And if that meaning, that message, or whatever it is that I have to say that I can't say, gets kind of stuck in me, that's very draining. That can be very draining. So it can be at a relational level, but then also I think it can just be more systematic. So it might be that the nature of the line of work we're in, or the system of work that we're in, is built on a transfer of value where we give our time in exchange for money. And part of the written or unwritten expectation is that we give up some sort of agency, which shouldn't be. That's I think always a degrading thing if we give up some of our sense of choice. But I think sometimes that's baked into some of what modern kind of work is like. It's going back to that view that as work has become really specialized, I just do my bit, let's say, of the assembly line. I don't enjoy the production of the full thing and get to see the outcome and the joy that the end user gets. I just do my bit. And that, that system of manufacturing, and then broader out in work in general, requires us to not have a full control, full autonomy, full agency over things. And so there's that kind of a system is one where it can be harder for me to be honest. And so sometimes where I'm coming from is, a lot of times when I'm going into businesses and talking about trust, people might say, well, yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense when I think about how I build trust with my best friend or my partner or, a family member or something outside of work. But this is work. And, we have different kinds of conversations at work, and I'm not supposed to bring all that kind of stuff right into work. And so something happens when we go from being honest in an interpersonal way to being honest into what feels like a machine. And so speaking philosophically, I think something happens. And when I say speaking philosophically, what I mean by that is when I'm thinking about honesty, not as an experience, but as like a concept. And philosophy is very experiential as well. But I think if you say, what does this mean philosophically? I get into the space of going, how do we understand the meaning of this? What does this do for us and to us? And so I think what the philosophy of honesty at work gets complicated, because now we're talking about scale and size, and we need systems, and we need contracts, and we need all these sorts of things, because it's too big for just one person to have oversight. And in that, it's really hard to be honest about some things. So I guess to come back to what I think is hopefully a helpful answer is, when we're being honest at work, we need to navigate a balance between honesty that is just, because I think it, I'm going to say it, or because I feel it, I'm going to say it. That's not always appropriate. But where honesty is appropriate at work is if it's about a work thing where there's a professional perspective, there's a professional question, or I'm bringing the thought that I've gathered from my sort of diverse experience, and you are too, and we're benefiting from that diversity of thought, then it's completely appropriate, I think, to share that and be honest about that. Where I think it falls down is trying to be honest in the sense of, well, I'm only honest if I'm a completely 100% an open book, and that's not going to work at work, right? But I think there's still ways to be honest in the workplace.
And I think, thank you for all of that. It's so rich. When you talk, I just keep thinking about, there is a way to design business that can facilitate the type of honesty that we're talking about. And there's a systems thinker named Donella Meadows who talks about feedback loops are critical to create healthy organizations. And a lot of times the feedback loops are totally broken between the right and the left side, between departments, between people, and the information, the actual information that is emerging through the entity, it just can't cross-pollinate in a way that makes the entity evolve in a healthy, positive fashion. And so everybody then is tasked with being siloed and holding the pressure of being siloed. So when we go into the conversation about how do you design organizations that are, and how I would put it, energetically honest, because the ultimate goal is growth, but it's growth at a rate that the entity can thrive in, not be collapsed by. And so, that's where your thought stream took me, is like, it just, again, it go to me when I think about honesty in the workplace. A lot of this is a design issue of how you get information from one part to the other, and set the agreements that this isn't about you coming in and just dumping how you feel without reflection on how it benefits the whole. Like, that's a necessary layer in that process.
Yeah, I think honesty needs accountability, too. It's almost like we need I think this goes back to my thinking on trust. It responds to something else. So there's in the literature, the philosophical literature on trust, one view is that trust is a reactive attitude. A reactive attitude is one which is an experience, an attitude that we have, like indignation or like trust, which is triggered or comes out, is a reaction to another expression of intention. So if someone does something kind to me, that might be an expression of kindness, of sort of goodwill towards me, and the trust that I then get a little bit more of towards that person is a reaction. It's a reactive attitude that's calling out to that. But the helpful insight that I think comes out of that literature is that trust is not just reactive, it's co-reactive. So that is, if you show me kindness and then I trust you a little bit more, in trusting you, I'm also calling for some kind of response. I'm calling for then you to also continue being trustworthy and sort of care well for the vulnerability that's been shown and vice versa, right? And I think honesty is maybe like that too. So if we just throw honesty into a room that doesn't have the scaffolding to hold it, that isn't a vessel for that, in other words, our honesty should maybe be seen as a co-reactive attitude. That is one where we are honest because, in part, we know that there is a system set up that has those feedback loops, that has the scaffolding of this is a place where we work really hard to be honest, and we also really work hard to own what we share, so that it's not just that sort of throwing stuff out. Well, hey, because that's just what I think, and you better deal with it. It's no, I'm being honest, but I'm also going to own that because I know that what I bring into the work makes a difference. It has an impact, and so I'm going to be responsible with my honesty too. And in doing that, I'm calling for, it's an invitation for others to be honest with me and responsible. And it's that back and forth. I think something that sometimes I think gets lost is how some of these things, I don't want to say concepts because they're not just words and things, they're actual real things, but like trust and honesty, and they don't just exist in a vacuum. They are relational. And that is to say, they're not just involved in relationships, but they call for responses and they're invitations to other people to also behave. And so I think that's maybe another lens through which to understand that concept of feedback loops from Meadows and things you're talking about.
Do you consult organizations to design like a living system?
No, but
because it feels like you do.
Okay.
Like how you are relating to it would be very in alignment with living systems design, because it's all about sensing and responding, and it's all built on relationality. So that's why I was asking if you fancy yourself as a living systems designer.
No, I think it's very much in the way that we work, but I think probably where we diverge isn't so much with living systems, but with how we understand traditional sort of consulting. So we don't embed ourselves in businesses, and we don't sort of work on helping them co-create the systems that they want to build. We come in often at the point of there's a behavioral gap, or there's a learning gap, and we want to. Or there's just, we never have time to think. We need some time to think differently and things. And so we'll come in and create a space and share really practical frameworks and tools to get people thinking and help them be doing their best strategic thinking and those sorts of things. And baked into that is relational stuff, is systematic ways of thinking, but we're not sort of sitting alongside creating cultures and systems within the business.
Mm-hmm. So when you get them to think.
Yes.
It feels redundant from the question I asked earlier, but are you giving them a framework to also understand what they're feeling? And what are those practices that you walk them through to understand that part of themselves?
Yeah. So I'll give you what I hope is a really simple one. We, in our change workshop, so it's thinking through change, and essentially, when we do our best thinking, when we're thinking critically, thinking creatively, strategically, whatever, there are moves that we're making. And a lot of times where those moves play out is when we're leading through change, or when we're just going through change ourselves. So we'll do sessions on those sort of nuts and bolts of strategic thinking or critical thinking, but then we also do sessions that are just literally around, now let's specifically think through a change. And a framework that we like to use is a mashup of Fishbone mapping, which comes out of Japanese manufacturing, and ancient Stoic philosophy. And I should say that we differentiate between philosophy, philosophies, and philosophers, and we specialize in philosophy, which is that love of wisdom, where philo just means love, Sophia means wisdom. It's the sort of pursuit of, meaning, understanding, truth. How do we really think well for ourselves? We're careful not to teach specific philosophies and talk too much about philosophers, because I don't want people just going away from our sessions sort of being able to talk about philosophy or quote someone. I want them to be thinking better for themselves. And so when we draw on things like the Stoics, there are moves that the Stoics make in their philosophy, and when you study them, you end up making some of those moves yourselves in your own thinking. And so we'll tease those out and then put them into a really helpful framework. And so what we do with people around change is we'll take something like Fishbone mapping, which effectively you would take a portion of a project at work, or it comes out of, like I said, Japanese manufacturing, but it might be a portion of the manufacturing process, or a strategy you've got to work on, or a new communication policy for your team or something. You draw a horizontal line, draw sort of two triangles facing the same direction at either end of those lines, and then have diagonal lines coming off that central horizontal line, so that you end up having something that kind of looks like a fishbone diagram in front of you. And you would take the change that you're going through, write it in the head of the fish, and then the question that we ask people to think about is, what makes up your change? What makes up this challenge? What makes up this change? What often happens in the first instance is people will start writing down sort of the steps that they're going through in the change, or the steps to get to a conclusion of the project. And that's a very, I think, left brain, that's a very analytical sort of project-based way to think about it. And so then we go back and we say, well, really what we want to get at is not the building blocks for it, but the prompt is, what makes up the change? And so what does that change mean to you? And that can be left brain, that can also be right brain. And so where we bring it in to your question is, if someone says, well, for me, I'm going through a change of, I'm being asked to use a lot more AI in my role, and kind of doing that, but I have some hesitations, and I don't know, it feels like it's moving too fast, blah, blah, blah. So they've written AI in the head of the fish. And then one of the main bones that comes off in the fishbone is maybe, efficiency. And I'm trying to work out how I can be more efficient leveraging AI. But where we want them to get to is also to have a bone that's like fear. So one of the things that makes up their change isn't just the technical sides of starting to work with AI more. It's also, how is this going to impact my job, for better or worse? My sort of fear of, am I going to get it right? Do I really know what I'm doing with this? I don't know, the sort of hesitancies that might come up, whatever it might be. And then we get them to drill down, and the next layer is to go, okay, now take each of those main bones, deepen, now ask of each of those, what's that really about? And start adding sub bones. And so again, to come back to your question of like, where is it? Where are the feedback loops? Where are the two sides talking to each other? Where are we bringing in things that aren't just what we might traditionally view as analytical? It's to say, what does that really mean? And the meaning could be left brain, it could be analytical, it could be conceptual and content that we might say, oh, well, for me, I need to go to a course on how to use this AI tool, or whatever it might be. But it also could be there's something about my anxiety around it. And what's that really about? And we're getting them to drill down into the felt experience of that. And then where we bring in the Stoic philosophy is, once they've got their map all done, we go, the Stoics were really big on saying, work out what you can control and what you can't control, and focus on the stuff you can control and don't sweat the rest. Now, for them, they were really purists, and they thought the only thing that you could control was like your mind, which is pretty hard even sometimes. But so what we then try to do is, looking at your fishbone map, where on this map where you said there are things that the change means X, Y, or Z, whatever, where are the things you would say you can control? Where are the things that you would say you can't control, but you could nudge somehow, you could influence? And where are the things that you can either control or influence, but you just have to accept? And so we get people labeling those things. And then, and in doing that, the real, I think, value of the philosophy isn't knowing about Stoics, and it's not about, writing down whatever you do on the map. It's about what you have to confront to be able to do that exercise, which is partly felt experience, it's partly emotive, it's partly cognitive. So it all kind of comes together in that kind of a framework.
Yeah, and I think this is why we find such resonance with you, is because in that process, I can totally feel how you're cross-lateralizing their brain. You're getting the two sides into conversation, which actually creates a healthier brain. It is difficult for executives that are always being looked to for answers to acknowledge vulnerabilities, and yet they will not be able to get through major change with any form of health or grace without contending with the aspects that maybe feel more vulnerable. And so how do you secure, traditional executives that this is a part of leadership, contending with your vulnerabilities, not just from a business perspective, but from, a personal experience? How do you get them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I started, I mentioned before that before I was doing, that this work sort of started out with the trust work, right? And it's changed somewhat now, but I used to have quite often times when a business would say, or a person that's bringing me in to work with a business on would say, oh gosh, it'd be great if we could do something around trust. But if we call it trust, no one's going to come. So can we do, effective, innovative collaboration or something, and that's fine. I think that still can have integrity, and we can focus on collaboration that helps us innovate and then get into all of this is driven by trust. And when we have that going well, then everything sort of spins up, right? And I think that's part of the answer, my answer anyway, is that if we come right out and say, look, to be successful, you've got to be vulnerable. That sounds scary. And we haven't really contextualized or articulated what we mean by that. But if we start, I think, first of all, with the person that we're talking with and recognize that they are a person with a first name, just, like us, and flesh and all this sort of stuff, and not just a role, not just a CEO, but, Sarah or whoever it is, right? If we start with a person and start with their context and ask them, what's going on in your landscape right now, and they articulate some of that, then what I like to do is to just hear that and try to do something that just feels kind of simple, but go, okay, well then how can we actually be helpful given the landscape that you just articulated? And because I think that you're right, that success does require vulnerability, reflection, honesty, all the things we've been talking about. If I'm responding to an executive honestly, and if I'm responding in a way that I think is going to be actually really strategically important and useful, we're going to get onto things like vulnerability and trust, because that is objectively what is needed. But we bring them with us by making a well-founded case for it, by saying, okay, what's your landscape? Oh, okay, you've got these things going on. What would need to happen for that to go well? Oh, okay, A, B, and C. Well, what's a driver of A, B, and C? Well, actually, how you connect with people, how somewhere along that line, it's going to be correct that we don't have all the answers, and that things are moving very quickly, and therefore we need to be honest that we don't know. And there's lots of power in that. And now we're doing the vulnerability stuff without saying, you've got to be vulnerable, because that's just like the brand of vulnerability can be scary. So I guess my answer is start with the person and what's real. And if you follow the sort of breadcrumbs enough, it'll come out. But by that point, it'll be purposeful and it'll be authentic.
Trust the process. That's what it is. Yeah, you just trust that process. Indeed. Do you believe, this is one philosophical question, then I'll wrap us up. Do you believe that our manifest world is a reflection of our internal world?
That's a good question. I think it depends on what we mean by manifest world. So I definitely believe that what we take to be true is influenced by what's going on inside of us. All right. We see everything through lenses of that is our subjectivity. Just as an example of that, I ran what was a really hard trail run for me on the weekend. I live in a really hilly area, and there was an event that was on, and I went for it. I hadn't probably trained enough, and it was really painful. And my and I noticed that I kept saying to myself, my sort of mantra for the really hard bits were like, stay open and stay grateful. Because if I could shift from the pain to the, gosh, I get to do this, like I chose to do this and I get to be outside running. That's pretty cool. Then that greatly shifted how I experienced the hills I was running through. So I think the mind is powerful. Subjectivity shapes that. Does what I think shape I don't want to say, I'm pausing because I don't want to say the actual world, because I'm not sure that there's a divide between what's going on inside my head and the outside. But does what I think shape the world outside my head? Does what's going on inside my head actually make a difference? Yes, as well, through the choices I make and those sorts of things. I think I'm skeptical of the idea of, I don't want to get caught in sort of just think happy thoughts and it will be. But I think that what we do think does impact that which is real. Part of how we experience it is already what's going on inside of our heads. But it does also shape the world outside, because how I choose to spend my time is informed by how I think, and how I spend my time informs what actually goes on in the world. And I'll just bring my answer into land by saying, I find a lot of, the older I get, the more I find meaning in mystery. So what I've just articulated is what I would say I think, what makes sense to me at this moment, but there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on that I don't understand and that is mysterious. And I'm open to there being more mystery between the relationship of what goes on inside our heads and what goes on outside our heads. So I'm open to there being more. But at the moment, I think that what is as you say, the manifest world is influenced by how we understand it, insofar as our subjectivity shapes how we are experiencing it.
Thank you. Sometimes I just want to sit with your answer for a second and be like, I'm curious about that piece. I'm actually pretty convinced that the way we think creates a form of reality. And therefore, if I'm not satisfied with the manifest, with whatever is outside, if I tend to how I think and how I navigate my information and my energetic information, and I build from what I know to be true, that then maybe we'll experience more harmony out there. I guess I'm just making a case, for the ability that any of the suffering that we see is negotiable, that we have agency. And it's about enrolling people. This is what I've dedicated my life to, enrolling people to, navigate and really tap into the full spectrum of their information, so that they can create in ways that create life-affirming ripple effects. And that is a thought process, a feeling process. in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's that brings me right back to, the whole, that strapline for us around think better, do better. It's not, yes, I've made those two statements, but there's not this wedge between it. How we think does impact what we do, and that makes a real difference. So yeah, I think I'm there with you.
Sweet. So what can people that are interested in the summer cohort expect from Dr. Brennan Jacoby as a featured voice?
I think lots of questions. I love hearing diverse views, and I don't think there's just one way to articulate things. And so I love hearing what other people think, and I love identifying sort of load-bearing beliefs and terms that go, ooh, what do we mean by that? I think it's just normal, I think, to use words in ways and that we have thought through to some extent. But then when we're thinking with others, other people go, oh, what does that mean? And we go, oh gosh, I hadn't thought of that. And so I love having that kind of conversation. So I think it'll be really interesting to sharpen each other and to ask great questions that, not in the service of trying to get it right or trying to work out the one best answer or something. It's not about being super clever or something. It's about connection and saying, ooh, tell me more about that. What does that mean? Okay, well, if we say that, what might what we said before mean over here? So about curiosity, asking questions, maybe spotting connections. And I think also something that, I grew up in a lot of systems where I felt kind of, I don't know, there was shame if you didn't have the right answer or something, right? Or like questions could be silly, and that was a bad thing if you were asking a silly question, and that's just not the case. And so I love trying to make a space where there's that invitation to ask, to say, do you know what, we talk a lot about this word, but I'll be honest, I don't know what we mean by that. Could we define that? So I think that the space to be really, again, here's that word that we've been talking a lot about, but being really honest and say, because at the end of the day, it's not about posturing or ego or just sort of thinking big thoughts. It's about like actually thinking together, actually learning together, actually doing this. So I'm really looking forward to having that kind of conversation.
Okay, last question then. Who do you think is like ripe and ready for this kind of experience?
I think anyone who thinks there's got to be more, right? Like there's I'm showing up, I'm high performing, I can do the things I'm being asked to do, but it feels thin. How do I add the depth to my work? I think because in how you're articulating in SORCE, energetic literacy brings in all of that stuff. It's right brain, it's left brain, it's embodied, it's affective, emotive, but it's also well reasoned. All these things coming together, and so it meets you where you are, I think, but really importantly, it brings some of that depth, that substance. So I think people that are going, yep, I can play the game, but I'd like more, please.
So well said. That gave me chills. Dr. Brennan Jacoby, thank you so much for your connection, your contribution. I am so excited to kick off with you and just have you just in the driver's seat with me through the experience. It's going to be rich. It's going to be just layered with so much curiosity and care. And for each and every person that's thinking about it, just do it. Just get on in. We can't wait to be in conversation with you. So thank you, Doctor.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Jessica.